The Galactic Council's central chamber hummed with technological marvels beyond what most humans could comprehend. Holographic displays shimmered above each delegation station. Adaptive atmospheric bubbles ensured comfortable breathing for species requiring everything from methane to liquid nitrogen. And translation matrices converted over 3,000 languages simultaneously. Helena Petrova touched none of these wonders. She placed her worn leather notebook on the simple desk provided for Earth's delegation and arranged her few personal items. A tarnished subwoofer that somehow had passed security despite containing actual metal, a small framed photograph of a forest cabin, and a carved wooden spoon that she handled with particular care. Ambassador Petrova, your station's technical interface remains inactive, announced an automated voice. Would you prefer assistance? No need, Helena replied, her accent thick as winter honey. Paper has never crashed in diplomatic meeting, yes, and these old eyes prefer real ink. Several nearby delegates exchanged meaningful glances. The Mareskil representative, a feline being with luminescent fur, flicked its tail in what its species recognized as the gesture for primitive. Helena pretended not to notice, though her eyes caught everything. She had witnessed the rise and fall of empires on Earth. This cosmic parliament was merely the newest arena where power played its eternal games. The wooden pendant around her neck warmed slightly against her skin as she surveyed the chamber, identifying power brokers and potential allies. The proceedings began with ceremonial introductions of new representatives. When Earth's turn came, the draconian moderator seemed to accidentally skip Helena's formal introduction. She rose anyway, standing with quiet dignity. I am Helena Petrova, daughter of Yekaterina, granddaughter of Vasilisa, from the human world Earth. Her voice carried surprisingly well without amplification. I bring greetings from humanity's 17 colonies and Earth Council. Lord Cirxith, the imposing draconian ambassador, curled his scaled lip. The Council acknowledges Earth's representative, though we had expected someone more versed in interstellar protocols. I have experience with many kinds of negotiations, Helena replied mildly, fingering her pendant. Some older than your honored civilization, perhaps. This drew stifled laughter from several delegations, interpreting her words as the delusion of a species barely 2 centuries into spaceflight addressing a civilization with 50 millennia of recorded history. Helena simply smiled and sat down. As the session progressed, she remained silent, taking occasional notes with a fountain pen that leaked slightly. What none observed was how the ink sometimes moved by itself across the page, forming symbols no linguistic database in the galaxy could translate. During the mid-session recess, Helena made her way to the observation deck. She stood before the vast viewport, gazing at the swirl of stars. 3 small mechanical maintenance drones approached, then inexplicably altered their course to circle her before resuming their duties. Your pendant, came a soft voice. It contains organic material, quite against regulations. Helena turned to face an insectoid diplomat from the Hive Collective. Family heirloom, she explained, not hiding it. Just wood from birch tree. Very old. Our scanners detected anomalous energy patterns, the diplomat's translator continued. Are you carrying unauthorized technology? Helena laughed, a sound like distant wind through autumn leaves. No technology. Just old wood that has seen much history. In my homeland, we say some trees remember everything they witness. The insectoid's compound eyes studied her. Your species is puzzling. Primitive, yet you've achieved improbable technological leaps, almost as if guided. Helena's smile deepened, revealing teeth that seemed momentarily too numerous. Humanity had good teachers, Ambassador. We learned from those who walked our forests and swam our seas long before we built cities. The diplomat's antennae twitched in what might have been discomfort. The session reconvenes, announced the station eye. All delegates returned to central chamber. As Helena turned to leave, she whispered something that the insectoid's translator failed to process. Words in a language that predated any known to the galactic archives, a promise as old as the first human campfires. Those who show respect will find only kindness. Those who bring harm 3 times shall meet what waits beneath human skin. The Council's afternoon session focused on resource allocation for developing worlds, a topic Helena had specifically requested to address. Earth's colonies, while technologically advanced, struggled with the resource restrictions imposed by the Council's tiered development system. Helena rose when recognized, her simple Earth-made clothing stark against the ornate biological and mechanical attire of other species. The chamber's adaptive lighting seemed to dim slightly around her as she began to speak. Honorable Council, Earth requests reconsideration of Category 3 restrictions on helium-3 extraction for our Titan colony, she said, her translator converting her words into the melodic standard language. Our settlement of 30,000 souls. A sharp buzz interrupted her as Lord Xerxes activated his priority channel. Point of procedure, the Draconian announced, his scales shifting to display formal patterns. Earth representatives have submitted this identical petition, 3 cycles in succession. Council Bylaws Section 47 prohibits redundant requests. Helena's translator flickered, the small device at her throat emitting a brief shower of sparks before going silent. She tapped it once, then continued in her native Russian, her voice firm despite the language barrier. Lord Xerxes' aide, a smaller Draconian with specialized implants, leaned toward his superior. She claims new evidence from Titan shows sustainable extraction methods, he whispered, translating her speech. She's circumventing the translator lockout. Xerxes' eyes narrowed to vertical slits. With a subtle gesture toward the chamber security systems, he activated a little-used protocol. Helena's microphone deactivated mid-sentence. The Earth representative appears to be experiencing technical difficulties, Xerxes announced smoothly, and seems determined to waste the Council's valuable time on matters already decided. Perhaps humans struggle with our straightforward procedures. Laughter rippled through the chamber as several delegates from higher-tier civilizations exchanged amused glances. The Arcturian representative's skin flushed a deeper blue in what his species recognized as embarrassment on another's behalf. Helena stood motionless, one hand clutching her wooden pendant. For a brief moment, those nearest to her felt a strange pressure, as though the air had become suddenly heavier. Security will assist the Earth representative back to her quarters until her equipment can be properly calibrated. Xerxes continued, making a show of magnanimity. We shall proceed with Agenda Item 17. 2 hovering security drones approached Helena, their metallic carapaces gleaming under the chamber lights. She released her pendant and retrieved her cane, her face revealing nothing as the drones flanked her on either side. This one apologizes for the inconvenience, the drone's synthetic voice intoned, audible only to her. Please follow standard extraction protocols. As she was escorted from the chamber, Helena stumbled slightly, her cane clattering to the polished floor. The sound echoed strangely, persisting several seconds longer than acoustics should allow. When an attendant retrieved the cane, they failed to notice how the metal floor briefly rippled beneath it, like water disturbed by a stone. Back in her quarters, Helena sat in darkness. Station protocols had flagged her systems for security calibration, leaving her without communication or standard lighting. Only the stars visible through her small viewport illuminated the room. She removed her diplomatic identification badge and placed it on her small table beside a curious object she had somehow smuggled aboard, a small mortar and pestle carved from bone. From her pocket, she retrieved crumbs from the Council's dining facility, placing one each in different corners of the room. First offense given and noted, she whispered in Russian, her voice changing subtly, gaining harmonics impossible for human vocal cords. The old ways must be observed. She closed her eyes and reached out with senses far older than her apparent years. Throughout the station, small mechanical anomalies began to manifest. Temperature regulators in certain quarters fluctuated by 2 degrees. Security cameras in seldom-used corridors recorded brief moments of static. And in the private chambers of Lord Xerxes, all the filtered water developed a faint taste of iron. Outside Helena's quarters, the automated cleaning drone scheduled for her section abruptly changed its route, avoiding her door entirely. Its simplistic programming couldn't explain why, but something in its sensors registered the space as already occupied by something much larger than the small human woman who had entered hours before. In the station's environmental control center, a technician frowned at an unexpected reading. For exactly 3 seconds, the mass distribution in the human diplomatic quarters had registered as 3 times heavier than the structural specifications should allow. Helena awoke to the sound of her quarters door sliding open without the customary entry request. 4 draconian security officers entered, their scales polished to a ceremonial sheen that indicated an official operation rather than a routine check. Earth Representative Petrova, the lead officer stated, mandibles clicking between words. Council Security Protocol 23 authorizes inspection of diplomatic quarters when evidence suggests unauthorized technological interference. Helena sat up slowly in her bed, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Young ones enter home of elder without knocking, she observed calmly. On Earth, this shows poor upbringing. The officers ignored her comment and began a methodical search. They scanned her meager possessions with handheld devices, paying particular attention to her samovar and the wooden spoon. Nothing registering on standard frequencies, one officer reported. The lead officer's attention fixed on Helena's personal journal resting on her small desk. He approached it with evident suspicion, scales along his neck flaring slightly. Physical information storage, he noted, lifting the leather-bound book. Primitive but effective for bypassing data security protocols. Helena rose from her bed, suddenly moving with a grace that belied her apparent age. That belongs to family, not to council, she said, her accent thickening. Many generations of recipes and remembrances, not diplomatic material. The officer's clawed hand opened the journal, revealing pages covered in handwritten Cyrillic script interspersed with symbols that caused his visual processors to stutter. Unregistered cipher, he announced. Potential security violation. Helena stepped forward. Please return book to table, she requested, extending her hand. Contains only old stories. Nothing of interest to mighty council. The officer stepped back, tucking the journal into his equipment pouch. All materials containing unauthorized codes must be analyzed. You will receive appropriate documentation for confiscation. Something shifted in Helena's expression. Subtle but profound, like the moment before an avalanche begins. She reached for the journal with unexpected speed. The officer reacted instinctively, his armored forearm striking her shoulder to maintain distance. The impact was minor, causing Helena to step back, but a thin line of blood appeared on her cheek where his scales had grazed her skin. A single droplet fell, hitting the polished floor with an audible sound like a small bell. The officers continued their search, oblivious to how the droplet of blood seemed to flatten, then move with purpose toward the shadow beneath Helena's bed. Inspection complete, the lead officer announced eventually. Confiscated materials will be logged. Communication restrictions remain in effect pending investigation. After they departed, Helena sat motionless in the center of her room. She touched her cheek, examining the blood on her fingertip with clinical interest. Second offense given and noted, she whispered to the empty room. The balance tips further. Throughout the day, subtle anomalies multiplied across the station. In the central atrium's carefully curated garden, Earth-native mushrooms appeared in perfect circles despite no Earth flora being present in that section. The atmospheric regulators in the council chamber began producing air with the faint scent of pine forests and wood smoke. 3 separate delegates reported seeing their own reflections in polished surfaces momentarily replaced by images of merle trees. The station's master AI experienced 7 microsecond pauses, imperceptible to organic beings, but deeply troubling to the synthetic intelligences that helped maintain the facility. Within its quantum processors, diagnostic programs found unusual data patterns resembling old Earth fairy tales, somehow encoded into its security protocols. That evening, delegates from 17 species across the station experienced identical dreams of being lost in dark forests, where trees whispered their true names in voices like dry leaves rustling. They awoke with the taste of honey and iron on their tongues, their quarters inexplicably cold despite environmental controls reading normal. In her locked quarters, Helena sat cross-legged on the floor, humming a melody no audio system could properly record. Around her neck, the wooden pendant glowed with soft amber light visible only in certain spectrums. On her small table sat her journal, the exact journal that had been confiscated hours earlier, now surrounded by a circle of small bones that had not been there before. Outside on the station's hull, maintenance drones detected inexplicable scratch marks on access panels, marks that resembled enormous claws, or perhaps the talons of impossibly large birds. When directed to repair the damage, 2 drones inexplicably malfunctioned, their final transmitted images showing what looked like a dark forest reflected in the hull's surface rather than the starfield that should have been visible. The emergency council session convened amid growing station disturbances. Environmental systems continued reporting unexplainable anomalies. Temperatures fluctuating wildly in specific corridors, gravity strengthening and weakening in patterns that technicians insisted formed symbols in ancient Earth languages, and most disturbing, the persistent smell of forest loam and wood smoke in sections with no connection to organic material processing. Lord Cirxith occupied the central speaking platform, his scales polished to an aggressive luster that signaled high status among his kind. Behind him, a holographic display showed recordings of Helena's quarters, focusing on her journal with its indecipherable writings. Esteemed council representatives, Cirxith began, his translator modulating his natural hissing into diplomatic tones. These disturbances coincide precisely with the arrival of Earth's newest ambassador. Our security analysis confirms unauthorized communications technology, disguised as primitive record-keeping. The assembled delegates murmured among themselves. The Arcturian representative's skin pulsed between shades of troubled azure and skeptical violet. Has Earth been contacted regarding these accusations? The Arcturian asked, formal light patterns flickering across his epidermis. Earth communication protocols move too slowly for the urgency this situation demands. Cirxith replied dismissively, we must address the immediate threat. Station security escorted Helena into the chamber. She walked steadily despite her age, her cane tapping rhythmically against the floor, a sound that seemed to echo longer than acoustics should allow. Something about her appearance had subtly changed. Her silver hair appeared wilder, her posture less stooped, her eyes reflecting light in ways that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Ambassador Petrova, Cirxith addressed her formally. You stand accused of technological sabotage against council facilities. Your possessions contained unauthorized communication devices and encoded threatening materials. Helena regarded him calmly. I carry no technology besides what council provides, she answered, her voice carrying throughout the chamber despite her translator remaining inactive. Journal contains only old stories. Stories humans remember, even as stars change. Cirxith's scales rippled with irritation. Your primitive deceptions insult this assembly. Security has detected energy patterns emanating from your person since the disturbances began. Perhaps council security needs better education, Helena suggested, a strange smile playing at her lips. Not all patterns come from technology. Some much older, from times before machines. You admit to employing non-standard energetic manipulation. Cirxith pressed, sensing an advantage. Helena straightened, suddenly seeming taller. I admit to being human, Ambassador. We carry many things with us to stars. Not all visible to your instruments. Murmurs spread through the chamber as delegates recognized the implications. Humanity had always been classified as a purely technological species with no psionic abilities, a classification that determined their resource allocations and development restrictions. Cirxith flared his neck scales in victory. The representative admits to concealing capabilities during Earth's integration assessment. This constitutes diplomatic fraud, at minimum. As Helena began to respond, Xerxes signaled to his security chief. A high-pitched tone emanated from nearby speakers, a sonic dampening field specifically calibrated to human vocal frequencies, designed to prevent further communication without the appearance of physical restraint. Helena winced as the sound disrupted her speech. Her eyes narrowed, focusing on Xerxes with unexpected intensity. Around her neck, the wooden pendant darkened to the color of old blood. Every light in the chamber simultaneously dimmed, then brightened to painful intensity before going completely dark. Emergency systems activated seconds later, bathing the chamber in crimson illumination. Helena stood unchanged in the center of the floor, but the temperature had plummeted so drastically that her breath formed visible clouds. Frost patterns spread across the council table, forming intricate designs resembling eyes and branches. 3 times offended, Helena said, her voice somehow perfectly audible despite the sonic dampening field. The old covenant must be honored. The security chief moved to activate secondary containment protocols, but stopped mid-motion, his body suddenly rigid. A look of primal terror crossed his reptilian features as his scales began to blacken at the edges, as though touched by invisible flame. Helena raised her hand, and every translator in the room ceased functioning simultaneously. When she spoke again, each delegate heard her words in their native language, regardless of biological capability. "You children of distant stars should have asked what humanity sacrificed to reach you," she said, her voice layered with whispers and echoes. "We did not come to the heavens alone. We brought what has always walked beside us." The chamber doors sealed with an ominous sound of twisting metal. On every display screen, the same image appeared: a dark forest beneath an alien sky, and at its center, a small wooden house perched on enormous chicken legs. Station-wide alerts blared as primary systems failed across 12 separate sectors. Emergency bulkheads deployed automatically, isolating critical areas from what the central AI designated as environmental anomalies of unknown origin. Inside these sealed sections, something impossible was happening. Space itself seemed to fold and stretch, creating dimensions that shouldn't exist within the station's physical constraints. Lord Xerxes fled the council chamber with his remaining guards, abandoning protocol as primal instinct overwhelmed diplomatic training. The draconian security channels filled with fragmented reports. Gravity reversing in residential sectors, maintenance droids assembling themselves into forms resembling animated skeletal hands, and most disturbing, numerous sightings of an elderly human woman appearing simultaneously in multiple locations throughout the station. In his private command center, Xerxes barricaded himself with his most elite guards and a communications specialist. The room's reinforced walls and independent life support should have provided security, but the air already carried the faint scent of forest loam and wood smoke. "Establish emergency contact with the homeworld," Xerxes ordered, his scales pale with stress. "Request immediate extraction and containment protocols for unknown human weapon." The communications officer worked frantically at her console, but every screen displayed the same image: dense forest under unfamiliar stars. "Systems unresponsive, Ambassador. Quantum entanglement communicators show connection, but data packets return corrupted." "Impossible," Xerxes hissed. "Those systems bypass normal spacetime limitations." A soft, rhythmic thumping sound emanated from beyond the sealed door, not the expected sounds of station machinery or security forces, but something organic, like massive footsteps, or perhaps the sound of enormous pestle grinding against mortar. The room's temperature plummeted without triggering environmental alarms. Frost patterns formed on the reinforced viewport, creating shapes that resembled staring eyes and gnarled branches. "Ambassador," the security chief whispered, weapon drawn, "look at the external monitor." The security feed showed the corridor outside their sanctuary, empty except for unusual shadows that moved independent of any visible source. But as they watched, a second door materialized beside their own, constructed of ancient wood with intricate carvings depicting forest scenes and strange creatures. It hadn't been there moments before, and by all physical laws, couldn't exist. The wooden door swung open without sound, revealing not the corridor they had seen on monitors, but a night-dark forest clearing. Standing in the doorway was Helena Petrova, transformed. Her diplomatic uniform had been replaced with clothes of undyed linen, embroidered with red symbols that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. Her silver hair now hung wild and free, woven with small bones, feathers, and tiny bells that chimed without movement. Her eyes reflected starlight like a nocturnal predator's. Little dragon who plays at cosmic politics, Helena's voice emanated from every speaker in the room, while her lips remained still. Did no one warn you about Earth's diplomatic corps? Xerxes drew himself up, desperate courage replacing fear. Whatever technology or psionic ability you're employing violates 16 separate council restrictions. Stand down immediately or face extinction-level sanctions against your homeworld. Helena laughed, a sound like dry branches breaking in winter wind. I have walked the stars since before your ancestors crawled from their hatching pools, little dragon. She stepped forward, one foot crossing the threshold between the impossible forest and the command center. Humanity did not discover spaceflight through mere ingenuity. We made bargains with what already knew the paths between stars. The metal walls around them groaned and twisted, the advanced alloy reconfiguring into patterns resembling ancient tree bark. Screens flickered between normal displays and images of dense forests, bone-white birch trees, and strange huts that shouldn't be able to stand. One of the guards fired his weapon in panic. The energy pulse struck Helena directly, then dissipated around her like mist, leaving her unmarked. She clicked her tongue in disappointment. Such poor manners, she chided, raising one hand. The guard's weapon transformed in his grip, metal and circuitry becoming wood and bone before crumbling to dust. In my day, guests brought gifts, not weapons, when entering a home. What are you? Xerxes demanded, backing against the far wall as reality continued unraveling around them. Helena smiled, revealing teeth too numerous and sharp for any human mouth. I am Baba Yaga, little dragon. I am what humanity brought with them to the stars. Her shadow stretched impossibly across the floor, taking the shape of a house on massive chicken legs, and you have violated hospitality 3 times. The station transformed beyond recognition as ancient magic overwhelmed advanced technology. Corridors stretched into impossible lengths, sometimes opening into forest clearings that couldn't exist within the station's architecture. The laws of physics bent and warped around a new reality imposed by something far older than galactic civilization. Delegates found themselves trapped in environmental bubbles that drifted through this changed landscape. Those who had shown respect to Earth's representatives discovered their bubbles remained comfortable, guiding them gently to safe havens where normal physics still applied. The Arcturian ambassador, who had questioned Xerxes' accusations, found himself in a peaceful clearing where a samovar poured perfectly prepared tea suited to his biochemistry. Those who had participated in Helena's humiliation faced a different fate. A squad of draconian security officers moved in tight formation through a corridor that now resembled a forest path. The metal walls transformed into ancient trees whose branches seemed to reach toward them as they passed. Their scanner technology functioned erratically, showing life signs that appeared and disappeared too quickly to track. Movement at 2 o'clock, the lead officer whispered, raising his weapon toward a flicker of motion between the trees. Identify yourself immediately. Nothing answered but the soft rustle of leaves and a distant sound like laughter. This is impossible, another officer hissed, scales bristling with fear. We're still in the station. These are hallucinations or projections. The squad leader's communicator crackled with static, then cleared to transmit a message from another team. Being hunted. Something moving through walls. Enormous pestle crushing. Retreat to. Oh stars, it sees us. The transmission ended in screams. The squad doubled its pace, desperately seeking an exit from the transformed section. They rounded a corner to find a small clearing where a crude wooden table had been set with bread, salt, and a single cup of clear liquid. Some kind of primitive offering, the squad leader observed, approaching cautiously. "Don't touch it," warned his second, scanning the arrangement. "Unknown organic compounds, potentially hazardous." From the shadows beyond the clearing came a soft, rhythmic sound, something massive moving methodically through the underbrush. The officers formed a defensive circle, weapons raised toward the disturbance. What emerged wasn't Helena, but something that defied rational explanation. An enormous mortar, big enough to hold a person, moving on its own across the ground. Beside it floated a pestle larger than a draconian body. Both objects were made of ancient wood polished by centuries of use, carved with symbols that hurt the eyes. The squad opened fire automatically, energy weapons discharging in a blinding display that left smoking craters in the forest floor. But the mortar and pestle remained untouched, advancing steadily. "Retreat," the squad leader ordered, but as they turned, they found the path behind them transformed into solid wall of intertwined trees. The mortar paused before the table, hovering expectantly. The air grew heavy with anticipation. One officer, younger than the others, approached the table with trembling hands. Following some instinct older than rational thought, he broke off a piece of bread, dipped it in salt, and placed it in the waiting mortar. The tension broke immediately. The mortar and pestle retreated into the shadows, leaving the path behind them clear. "What did you do?" demanded the squad leader. "I remembered a story my grandmother told me," the young officer replied, his voice unsteady, "about a witch in the woods who tests travelers. Those who show proper respect may pass. Those who don't." He left the sentence unfinished. Throughout the station, similar scenes played out as the transformed reality tested each individual according to ancient rules of hospitality and respect. Human staff moved freely through the chaos, leaving small offerings at corridor intersections and whispering old stories to frightened aliens they encountered. At the heart of the transformed station stood what had once been the central atrium, now a vast forest clearing dominated by a wooden structure perched atop massive chicken legs that constantly shifted to maintain balance. The structure resembled a small cottage from old Earth fairy tales, complete with carved window shutters and a chimney releasing sweet-smelling smoke. Inside this impossible dwelling, Helena rocked in a chair carved from a single massive bone. Her fingers sorted through a collection of items spread across her lap. Teeth from various species, feathers from birds that existed only in legend, and small mechanical components harvested from station systems. "Such interesting manners these star people have," she murmured to herself, selecting a draconian scale and holding it to candlelight. "So much power, so little wisdom." The scale blackened at its edges as though burning without flame. Throughout the station, Lord Cirxith's lieutenant collapsed in a supply closet, suddenly overwhelmed by visions of the hut and her terrible children. Helena smiled, continuing her work. The hunt had only just begun. 2 station days passed under the grip of the transformation. The normal passage of time seemed distorted, some delegates experiencing near hours, while others lived through what felt like weeks in the altered reality. Emergency protocols remained active but ineffective against something that operated outside the understood laws of physics. Lord Cirxith emerged from hiding, his once resplendent appearance now a shadow of its former glory. His scales had dulled to a flat gray, some falling away to reveal pale skin beneath. His ceremonial armor hung loose on a frame that seemed to have aged years and days. With no functioning weapons and no communications with his homeworld, he made his way through the transformed station, guided by instinct rather than technology. He passed through sections where reality merged chaotically, advanced station architecture intertwined with primeval forest. In one corridor, he watched as a maintenance drone scuttled past, its mechanical components partially transformed into wood and bone, still attempting to fulfill its programming despite its impossible anatomy. Eventually, he found himself before the transformed council chamber. The grand hall had become a massive clearing centered around an ancient oak tree whose branches formed a living canopy overhead. The stars visible through this impossible ceiling weren't the familiar constellations of local space, but older patterns, Earth's night sky from millennia past. Helena sat at the base of the tree, looking more like a force of nature than a diplomat. She hummed softly while feeding crumbs to small creatures that resembled flying hands with eyes embedded in the palms. "Have you come to negotiate, child of scales?" she asked without looking up, or merely to surrender. Xerxes approached with as much dignity as he could muster. "What manner of weapon has Earth deployed?" "The Council will respond with maximum force once contact is reestablished." Helena laughed, a sound like autumn leaves skittering across stone. "No weapon, little dragon. Just me." She rose, her form shifting subtly between elderly diplomat and something older and more terrible with each movement. Humanity never stopped believing in its monsters. We simply taught them new manners for a new age. She circled him like a predator assessing prey. When humanity reached for the stars, we faced a choice: abandon our oldest companions or bring them with us. The powers that walked our forests, swam our seas, and haunted our mountains, the beings your kind would call myths or legends. "Impossible," Xerxes whispered, though his eyes tracked her movement with primal fear. Earth was thoroughly evaluated before admission. No unusual energy signatures, no evidence of non-technological advancement methods. "Because we agreed to hide," Helena replied simply. "The old powers consented to new boundaries, new rules. We bound them with purpose when we claimed our place among the stars." She gestured to the transformed station around them. "But some agreements are older than your council's laws. The protection of guests and ambassadors, the sanctity of truth in negotiations, the giving of proper respect. These laws predate civilization itself." She stopped before him, her eyes reflecting starlight that shouldn't exist inside a space station. "You broke these laws 3 times. Xerxes drew himself up, summoning the last of his diplomatic training. "Whatever abilities your species possesses should have been declared during integration. This demonstration constitutes a galactic security breach at minimum." "You misunderstand," Helena said, suddenly gentle. "This is not humanity's weapon or ability. I am not humanity's creation or tool." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I am what walked alongside them since they first kindled fire in dark caves. I am what waited at the edges of their villages, testing those who entered my forests. I am what humanity appeased with offerings and honored with stories." She produced a small wooden talisman, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to move when not directly observed. "Your council thought humans achieved spaceflight through mere technological innovation. The truth is more complex." The talisman projected images around them. Ancient Earth ceremonies, strange figures at the threshold of early space programs, whispered deals made in forgotten languages. "We were guided," Helena explained, "by those who already knew the paths between stars. Beings your science cannot categorize because they exist in the spaces between your understanding. Humanity didn't just build machines to reach space. We made deals with powers that have always known the way." Xerxes stared in horrified understanding. "Are all human representatives like you?" Helena smiled, revealing too many teeth. "Each carries something different. The woman who speaks for Mars hosts something from Egyptian tombs. The Jovian ambassador carries Norse legends in his blood. We are everywhere humanity has gone." One standard week after what official records designated the diplomatic incident, the Galactic Council reconvened in a station restored to near-normal functionality. Technical teams still puzzled over certain anomalies. Corridors that measured longer from inside than outside, rooms that remained inaccessible despite no physical barriers, and most peculiarly, plants resembling earth birch trees growing from metal flooring in seldom-used maintenance sections. The chamber filled slowly as delegates arrived with uncharacteristic punctuality. Many carried small tokens that hadn't been present before: polished stones, wooden charms, or small cloth bags containing unknown substances. More noticeable was the subtle change in behavior. Representatives who had previously ignored Earth's delegation now offered formal greetings, some even including small bows or gestures borrowed from human customs. Lord Xerxes entered last, his appearance dramatically altered. His once vibrant scales had dulled permanently to a matte gray, and along his crest, several scales had fallen away completely, leaving bare patches that marked him as changed among his kind. He moved stiffly, aged beyond his years, but with a solemnity that commanded attention. When the session was called to order, Xerxes requested and received permission to address the assembly before regular business commenced. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice lacking its former resonance, "I speak today to formally acknowledge diplomatic transgressions against Earth's representative." His scales lay flat against his body in what his species recognized as a posture of profound humility. The draconian hegemony recognizes that our actions violated the most ancient principles of diplomatic engagement. He turned to face Helena Petrova, who sat at Earth's station looking once again like nothing more than an elderly human woman with gentle eyes and a pleasant smile. Only the most observant delegates noticed how the shadows behind her chair sometimes shifted without corresponding movement. "Ambassador Petrova, we formally request forgiveness for these transgressions and offer reparations according to both council statutes and," he paused, mandibles clicking nervously, "older laws of hospitality and respect." Helena inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. "Earth accepts your apology, Ambassador. Old debts are now settled." A collective exhale seemed to pass through the chamber, though many species present didn't technically breathe. Xerxes continued, addressing the full council. "I propose new protocols ensuring diplomatic immunity extends to cultural artifacts, practices, and representatives of all member species, regardless of form or function." His gaze swept the chamber. "Recent events have demonstrated that our understanding of sapient life remains incomplete." The proposal passed unanimously, without debate, a first in council history. As the session proceeded with routine matters, delegates occasionally glanced toward Helena, who participated with appropriate commentary and procedural votes. Nothing in her demeanor suggested anything unusual, yet none could forget what they had witnessed, or what they thought they had witnessed, during those impossible days. When the meeting concluded, the Arcturian speaker approached Helena privately as delegates filed out. "Ambassador," he began, his skin cycling through formal shades of diplomatic blue, "my government has authorized me to ask a question of sensitive nature." He hesitated, then continued, "Are there many like you among humanity's representatives?" Helena smiled warmly, patting his arm with a weathered hand. "Every culture carries its old stories into the stars, speaker. Humanity simply remembers how to listen to ours." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, "and how to wake them when needed." In the months that followed, diplomatic incidents involving Earth's representatives dropped to zero. Research divisions across multiple species quietly established departments dedicated to studying Earth folklore and mythology. New stations and embassies incorporated small gardens with specific plants from Earth, and many adopted the custom of leaving offerings of bread and salt at entryways, officially listed in architectural plans as traditional hospitality features. Most telling was the draconian hegemony's unilateral support for Earth's petition to reclassify their development tier, granting access to previously restricted resources. When questioned about this unprecedented reversal, Lord Xerxes would only say that proper respect for humanity's unique cultural heritage served everyone's interests. Throughout council space, diplomats began exchanging a new saying when facing difficult negotiations. "Tread carefully, for even humans have learned there are lines not to be crossed thrice." And on distant Earth, in a forest older than human memory, a small wooden hut on chicken legs settled deeper among ancient trees. Inside, an old woman sorted through new names and faces, humming songs older than civilization, while weaving the fate of those who would soon travel to the stars carrying her stories with them. For in reaching the stars, humanity had not left behind its monsters and gods. They had brought them along, teaching them new ways and new rules for a new age of cosmic politics. But some rules remained eternal. Honor hospitality, keep your word, and never offend Baba Yaga 3 times.